Thank you for watching. My name is Glenn Morgan, and welcome back to another episode of We the Govern. Now today, of course, as I'm doing these videos from Washington State and reading national news, I think there's something that it always keeps coming back to me, and that is that what happens in Washington State absolutely won't stay here. And no matter who you are and how far you want to go, and no matter where you try to go to escape it, it's going to follow you. And I think that this story is just one that I hope to explain as I go through a few different examples of how Washington State sanctuary state policies, well, these guys right here may be very proud of them. They're obviously producing great harm and causing destruction, not just in the state of Washington, where we've been observing this for years and fighting and pushing back against it, but all throughout the country. Because the reality is, no matter how far you want to run, no matter how hard you try to get away, even if you think you've escaped it, that is escape very temporary in nature, because this stuff's coming to catch you, and no matter where you went, it's coming for you. And unfortunately, a lot of people learn this the hard way. They may not be able to find Bellingham, Washington on the map, but people, Afghan refugees like this guy who lived here, was still able to drive all the way across the country and murder two people from West Virginia who probably never heard of Bellingham before, or Washington State sanctuary policies. And unfortunately, these are being discovered and found out throughout the country the hard way. Now, just in case you haven't done so already, just a quick reminder before we jump into this here today, hit the like and subscribe button down below if you haven't already done so. Please feel free to share this video with others, especially if they don't live in Washington State, just so they understand why the fight that you and I are in, trying to restore liberty and freedom in our state and push back against corruption and fraud, that's very common and horrific all over our state here, why it matters, even if you don't live in Washington State. So let's just jump right into it. Obviously, Washington State has some very horrific political leadership who's, among other many things that they've done very poorly in our state, they've created sanctuary state policies that clearly reach way beyond the borders of Washington State. And even those red states where you think you've escaped these policies, I promise you, these tentacles have already reached into your state, no matter how conservative you think it is where you have moved. And of course, there's a lot of joys and wonder that come with being a sanctuary state like Washington, with very few consequences for people who do things like this on our roads every single day. And if they're not causing horrible pileups on I-5 or killing people driving over I-90, they're hitting bridges and they're causing all kinds of mayhem and damages all over the place. This recent story just from a few days ago explains and illustrates, I think, some of the joys and wonder that come along with being a sanctuary state. In this case, it was a Mexican national driving a car hauler. Now, he wasn't one of the hundreds and perhaps thousands who actually have illegal commercial driver's licenses issued by Washington State. He just didn't bother. He didn't have a driver's license of any kind, nor did he have insurance. And why not? Because there's no consequences for you at all if you don't have that. And even though it was clearly his fault, he caused this car accident just a few days ago up in Lacey on I-5. And he, of course, piled up 4 other cars, causing trauma and damage for 4 other families at least. He also had the bonus of causing a car accident with a school bus. So just one guy who's here, completely illegal, unknown what his English skills were at all, because they don't report on that in our state, nor do they even ask whether he was an illegal or just plain Mexican visiting here for fun, and he just picked up cars just to drive on the freeway and crash like this. And regardless, this is what happened. But of course, it doesn't just stay within Washington State. It's quite easy if you don't live here just to think, what the heck, that doesn't matter. It's a crazy state. Washington's a sanctuary state. Why should I care? I live in Idaho, I live in Texas, or I live in Florida. Well, of course, that's no protection for you, because just because you live in another state doesn't mean that Washington State can't reach out and touch you where you live too, because what happens in Washington clearly doesn't stay here. In this case, the photo that you saw here is from, and it's well publicized at this point in time, it was an illegal, of course, who came across the border illegally in California originally, decided to come up to Washington, where we easily gave him a commercial driver's license. A test, by the way, that he failed almost a dozen times before he finally was given it after the end. We don't know if he cheated to get it, or if they just decided that, what the heck, the guy's trying so hard, we're just going to hand it out to him. Now, I will point out that California did eventually give him a commercial driver's license as well, but they appeared to have used the fact that Washington State gave it to him first to compound the problem that Washington State already started. This guy drives to Florida, does this illegal U-turn, and of course he kills 3 people in Florida who probably didn't know much, weren't thinking about Washington State at all. Little did they know that their life was going to come to an end because of Washington State's sanctuary state policies. Of course, after the fact, the guy couldn't speak English or read road signs, but that's par for the course and pretty typical with how we do things in Washington State. Here he is getting a little bit more serious treatment from the feds, but at the end of the day, the reality is, as they started to dig into this after this event, they found out that at a bare minimum, just disclosed recently, the Washington State Department of Licensing is now admitting that they've handed out at least 700,000 illegal driver's licenses, or 700, commercial driver's licenses to illegals. I'm going to point out that this agencies denied that they did this at all. They just a few months ago were pretending that none of this was happening at all. But now that the feds have actually dug into this a little bit more, we're discovering that, of course, Washington State and our wonderful Department of Licensing was far worse than any of us realized, and they had handed out quite a few of them very illegally, which is just the way they roll. And it is highly likely, by the way, that this number is going to go up the more people dig into this agency and investigate it. Because after all, the commercial driver's licenses have been handed out by Washington State's Department of Licensing now for quite some time. And after all, what's the worst that could happen? Of course, when we're talking about Washington State's Department of Licensing, we are talking about an agency that is clearly in trouble and has been on the rocks for a long time. But remember, this whole thing started with them handing out driver's licenses to illegals and registering them to vote for decades now. And the fact that it morphed from that into handing out commercial driver's licenses that resulted in killing people in other states and damaging all kinds, just creating mayhem wherever it has basically, wherever they've gone, this is something that matters. So it's easy if you live in Idaho or you live in Texas or you live in Florida or some other state, West Virginia, and you think that what happens in Washington isn't going to affect you. And I wish that was true, but it isn't. Unfortunately, what happens here absolutely spreads like a plague, and it is going to affect you, and you just can't escape it. And this is one of the challenges that we face when we live in America and bad policies happen in other states. Obviously, just as an example, and of course, we've talked about this already a little bit, we had a guy over here who was an Afghan refugee living in Bellingham, Washington, who decided that driving clear across the country, killing a National Guardsman and wounding another one who's still in the hospital today, that this was just what he had to do, apparently. And I will point out that Washington State's a sanctuary state for people like this. And there was an NGO presentation, non-government organization, of course, nonprofit group. They were bragging to the Bellingham County Council that Washington State was one of the top refugee destinations here for these unvetted refugees from around the world. And they were doing this just a few months before they took a huge number in from Afghanistan, including the guy that drove across the country to kill those National Guardsmen. Now, in addition to him, right now, they're openly talking about how there's at least another 500 of them in Whatcom County alone. Now, we don't know if any of them are planning any long road trips to a place where you live, but right now, I guarantee you Washington State's doing absolutely nothing to stop that from happening. And of course, we've given these endless free services to attract more of them to come to our state so that they can come to yours. Now, one of the challenges, of course, that we have is that the political leadership in our state and others, and they do like to flock together, as we saw at Bob Ferguson's fundraiser here in Washington State, where he decides to bring in Governor Walz all the way across from Minnesota to brag about his fraud operation that he has been running there with some of his big campaign contributors in his state. Now, of course, Governor Walz really pointed out and made double down on dumb and decided that he wants to bring in even more fraudsters into his state. The less vetted, the better, and the more criminal-oriented, the better. It's absurd and actually astounding, and it would be comical if it just wasn't happening at such an extreme and ridiculous scale. Now, one of the things I am going to point out here is that one of the leading fraudsters here who was being investigated for a $250 million fraud operation just by himself, he's in the photos here with Governor Walz and other leading lights of the Democrat Party, During that $250 million Feeding Our Future fraud trial, there was actually a Seattle woman who was the courier who was flown out and actually to basically deliver bribe cash to a Minnesota juror with $120,000 as a down payment, with a script basically telling the juror to blame the court system and the states and the feds for being racist, of course, because that's what leftists always do. And then that bribe courier right now is still free in Seattle in a Somali community here right now so that she can keep doing it again. I don't know if this is her job or this is just something that she does for on a regular basis and does it for hire. Who knows? But the point is there's a Seattle connection to the fraud going on and that's being uncovered in Minnesota. We don't know how big and how bad it is. But again, this is another example of how what happens in Washington state doesn't stay here. It becomes intertwined and spreads all over the country. No matter how fast you run, no matter how far you go, you will not escape this. This is just one of those things because of the nature of this type of corruption and problems. I think that Washington state's horrific policies are absolutely going to follow you no matter where you go. This is unfortunate. I don't like living in a state and this isn't the element of my state. I love Washington state, but this isn't the part of the state I'm proud of. We have a state where our political class is basically, it's quite obvious, they're clowns and crooks on the best days that we have here. And that clownishness and that crooked behavior, the fraud that they support, that they encourage through their policies, they've allowed, and just a horrible series of bad ideas. You can call it socialism, you can call it just basic corruption. Whatever it is, as it spreads, it destroys the community that it's in, and it can't just stay there. It has to spread just like a disease, and it's not going to stay in Washington state. And that's why we have to do something to stop it. And I mean, this is basically how it works, right? Horrible bad ideas, human trafficking operations, drug cartel money laundering facilities, allowing the drugs and the Mexican drug cartels that are set up, and some of them are Chinese drug cartels as well, set up in Vancouver to start distributing that type of poison into the rest of the country. It has to be stopped in Washington before it gets to your community. Or perhaps it's just the homeless industrial complex, something that Washington State's done a really good job perfecting here, learning how to turn these grifting empires into excellent ways to spend a lot of money to make the problem far worse than it ever was in your community. These have spread into Montana. These have spread into Boise, Idaho. They've spread into Laramie, Wyoming. They're spreading all over the country, and we're training them right now in Washington and Oregon and California on how to make this a terrible program and destroy your communities too. Maybe it's just the vote by mail system that Washington State perfects, moves over to Colorado and helps destroy their state. Or it could be just as mundane as our hundreds and probably thousands of illegal commercial driver's licenses that we've distributed to who knows who that are causing death and mayhem on the roads of our country, including Florida. Or perhaps it's just these crazy, radicalized immigrants that we didn't bother to vet that one day decide driving all the way across the country to shoot some people is a good plan. It's hard to know exactly what the reasons are, but there are horrible policies in blue states, and they won't stay in those borders. There's no way that any of those bad policies will stay there. Like I said, it could be a drug cartel sanctuary distribution program, like Washington State does appear to encourage. From the governor all the way down to certain counties in our state, this is openly supported and allowed. So then they do these fentanyl distribution operations, and they end up in your community and your schools. Perhaps it's just the Washington, California, New York commercial driver's licenses. Those are handed out, and then, of course, those drivers end up killing people and injuring people and causing mayhem everywhere in every state in which they operate. Perhaps it's the Antifa, basically the rioters that we've trained, especially in Oregon, and now they can travel around armed in packs that go out and cause mayhem and destruction in places like Florida and Texas and Maryland. They aren't going to just stay inside of Portland and trashing that city forever. Then you have examples, as I mentioned earlier, the Washington Homeless Industrial Complex, replicated in Austin, Boise, Bozeman, and Atlanta. It doesn't matter where it is, they can come up with a way to make your community far worse than it is right now. And then the idea is, like I mentioned, a vote by mail, starting in Washington, spreading everywhere, and destroying the integrity of the election system wherever it pops up. Now, listen, we can pretend that this isn't happening. And I'm sure many people watching this video, probably you want to live in denial. And that's understandable. A lot of people want to bury their head in the sand and just wish it would all go away. Or if they perhaps can just blank it out and not look, just like my kids used to hide behind a sheet, playing hide and go seek, thinking if they couldn't see you, you couldn't see them. Maybe if they just pretend it'll all go away. The other option you have is just putting a happy face on it. Just pretend like everything's great. No matter how bad it is, if you haven't been run over yet by a CDL, illegal CDL on the freeway, then you can just figure it just doesn't matter. Or people can escape, and this is understandable. A lot of people would prefer just to sit back and be lazy. Maybe they even complain about it, but they don't want to do anything. And their solution is just to sit back, eat more fatty foods, watch Netflix, and just let the time pass by. Whether you want to bury yourself in escape opportunities like video games, watching movies, or just doing something else that takes your mind off the ugly world of politics, very understandable, but also not very productive. And listen, I totally understand. If you are going to fight a back against corrupt people like our governor in Washington State and the horrific policies that he's endorsed, supported, and spread everywhere, it is going to feel at times like you're pushing a boulder uphill. A very difficult process, a very difficult fight. Nothing about it's easy. You're going to feel isolated and usually outnumbered, and that's absolutely true, especially because of the distributed cost, concentrated benefits problem that occurs when you're dealing with corrupt government. Concentrated benefits, those who receive these benefits, the homeless industrial complex, the people who profit from bringing Afghan unvetted refugees here, the people who want to hand out illegal commercial driver's licenses to everybody and their brother, the people who get paid off to do these things, the people who extract and steal money from the taxpayers to fund corruption and fraud operations. These people are going to have a lot to lose, and they're going to fight back and push against anybody who's going to bring in any kind of reform. And that's why you're going to feel outnumbered, because oftentimes you will be outnumbered because they're going to concentrate their efforts on any of us that decide to expose the truth about what they're doing. But at the end of the day, it's my belief that I think what Bob Ferguson is trying to uphold in Washington State, what Governor Newsom's trying to uphold in California, what Governor Walz is trying to encourage more of in Minnesota, I think that these fraud operations and bad policies and corruption and things that they want to spread to the rest of the state, I believe at the end of the day, it will collapse like a house of cards. But it's only going to do that if you and I are willing to go and push back and confront and stop this kind of bad stuff from happening in Washington State. And where it has taken root, like it has in my state, then ripping it out and getting rid of it and exposing the truth, pushing back, and changing the way that things operate in our state so that they don't pollute other states. Frankly, it's about more than you and I. It's about more than whether it's a lot of work or how frustrating or disappointed you are. I believe at the end of the day, it's about future generations. I believe that it is worth the fight to save their future, even if you feel like you've kind of come close to the end of the road yourself. You have a lot of experience. You want to retire. You don't want to be caught up in these dramas and these fights and these ugly political messes. And you would rather just stay home and, eat bonbons and watch Netflix. I understand. But at the end of the day, I think that this is the fight that's come to our generation and our time, and we have no choice. And if we want them to have a better life, you and I are going to have to be the ones to fight and push back right now. Nobody said it's going to be easy, and there isn't a clear road. There isn't a clear path that we're headed down. There's no guarantees of success. All we can guarantee is that it's not going to be easy and that we have to stop it right now in states like mine, in states like Washington, in states like yours if you're watching me from another blue state, or in states like yours, if you're watching me from a red state, where unbeknownst to you and probably the people who call themselves Republicans where you live, a lot of these dumb, bad ideas are affecting your community right now, regardless of how much denial you might be living in. Go down to your local city and see if you don't have a homeless industrial operation complex, just like what we have in Washington, starting up. Because if you live in Bozeman and Missoula and Laramie and Boise, it is going on where you live. If you live in Oklahoma City and you don't think this is happening there, you're not paying attention. If you live in Salt Lake City and you think some of this stuff isn't happening there, you're not paying attention. Austin, Texas, in Miami, Florida, these things are happening in these other states. Just because they appear to be red, it doesn't mean that you're safe from these bad policies. They need to be defeated in states like ours so that they stop spreading, so that we can reverse the tide on a lot of these bad ideas. But again, there's no guarantee at the end of the day. So The only way you can change anything, though, I do know, you will not change it if you sit at home and do nothing. You will not change it if you bury your head in the sand. You won't change it if you run away. You just postpone the inevitable, and it's coming for you already, whether you're aware of it or not. The only way to change anything is to stand up, push back, and show up. Because, as I have always said and always will say, the future is only going to belong to those who show up.